Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'd like to ask you a question. Is there a virtual location that you find yourself missing? Maybe it's an old Minecraft server, a hub area, or even just a level in a video game that inspired awe in you. Maybe you saw it every day or would visit it every once in a while, but eventually, for one reason or another, you stopped visiting. This used to be an experience that only the most abstinent of man-children would experience, but as gaming continues to become a more mainstream hobby, more and more of life taking place digitally, and even the introduction of VR spaces like VR chat have led to the average person to start getting this feeling. Now more than ever, I see people experiencing this, even those who don't play video games that much. Even more curiously, this is about the same game, a game everyone was playing at the exact same time as everyone was stuck indoors. That game, of course, being Animal Crossing: New Horizons. Smash Brothers and Mario Kart are games that everyone's played at one point or another, but those aren't games that you get invested or sucked into the same way you do with Animal Crossing. And when people got invested into their first island for the first time, it was a new experience that many hadn't experienced before. This is Little Town, a place I've come to know and love. I spent hours a day trying to avoid schoolwork, trying to build up my island to be the peak of animal life. I have such a connection with this place as it helped me get through a tough time in my life when there really wasn't a lot to look forward to. Yeah, despite the honeymoon phase I felt with the game, nothing can last forever. The love I had for it eventually just started wearing off and I went there less and less every day. I was bringing everything to the table and they were giving nothing in return, so eventually I just had to split up. Now more than ever though, I find myself looking back on those days just more and more. Was the game ever lacking, or was I just expecting too much of it? That's the question I aim to answer today when I take a look at Animal Crossing: New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch. Animal Crossing was never Nintendo's most well-known franchise. While in Nintendo circles the series was well-regarded, it never seemed to be a bestseller on any of the consoles it was on. It makes perfect sense as to why this is. For the most general of audiences, the concept of a game where the main objective is to pay off your house debt doesn't exactly sound like a ton of fun. It sounds like a grim reminder. On top of that, the game's earliest entries weren't the easiest to access. The first game was originally exclusive to the N64 in Japan, and when it did make its way to the West, it came as an enhanced port to the GameCube. While it was one of the best-selling games on the system sold less than the original Xbox, a notoriously bad-selling console. The next game was Wild World on the original DS, and while it was on a better-selling console, the game was barely marketed. Despite this, the game sold pretty well, but the game was locked to handhelds which, while played by taxpayers, are more geared towards children, causing the game to be popular among them, but not in a way that affected the overall landscape of gaming. This continued with the follow-up City Folk on Wii, this time to abysmal sales. It wasn't until the 3DS entry, New Leaf, that Nintendo started to up their game with the series. The first little peak of Animal Crossing's stardom started on June 11th, 2013 with Nintendo's E3 digital event. This was the presentation that started to pump some steam back into Nintendo's dying engine, announcing Super Mario 3D World, Mario Kart 8, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, Bayonetta 2, Wind Waker HD, and yes, even Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Blacklist for the Wii U. Nintendo had been floundering the previous years due to multiple games being delayed and people not knowing what the fuck a Wii U is. Yeah! What the fuck is that? All these reveals really pumped some life back into Nintendo and its fans, and on top of these announcements, there was one that really stood out. Looking back at this trailer, I do feel like it could be executed better. If it wasn't for the big Smash logo appearing before the trailer ran, this would be one of the coolest fakeouts in trailer history. As it stands, it's just a pretty damn good trailer for one of the most anticipated games of the console's history. Alongside the proper unveiling of Smash for 3DS and Wii U, we got the reveal of the villager from Animal Crossing being the first new playable fighter. This trailer is now notable for being the first trailer to feature the now iconic red seal and envelope that Ultimate used constantly in its reveal trailers. It's really cute seeing such a minor mechanic from Animal Crossing become such a massive bit of iconography for a completely different series. Looking at most Smash speculation before this reveal, you'd probably be confused on why he was picked for the game, as almost nobody ever considered him viable by any means, including characters owned by companies other than Nintendo like Rayman or Crash Bandicoot. Most people just considered that an Animal Crossing character wouldn't work for Smash's gameplay. Hell, Villager was even considered for Brawl, but even the developers there thought he wouldn't fit. But after the reveal trailer, people were excited, and it got a lot of people's eyes on the actual Animal Crossing series. While at the time Animal Crossing was known in Nintendo circles and among children unfortunate enough to grow up with a GameCube, the average air breather had never heard of the series. Villager being the headliner of the biggest gaming crossover alongside his unique gameplay style led people to wondering, what is up with this guy? This of course led to a lot of 3DS owners turning around and buying the game to see what the series was all about, with the most recent game in the series being Animal Crossing New Leaf. New Leaf was released on November 8th, 2012 and was the series' first taste of success. While having a smaller install base than the DS, the 3DS era of Nintendo was better at marketing. Because they actually marketed things. This generation, Nintendo was a little more confident in marketing their more obscure games, which led to series like Animal Crossing and Kid Icarus thriving, and they used those ads to actually represent the games instead of whatever the hell this was. Sure, I miss Kirby playing with his finger, but using your ad space to actually get the game across was probably a good idea. The commercials made it look like you were gonna be the big shot, making all the rules and doing whatever you wanted, really harnessing the idea of what a kid thinks being an adult is like. In reality, Animal Crossing New Leaf was a cozy entry in the series where it gives you a bit more control than previous games. While other games have you on equal footing as your fellow neighbors, New Leaf put you in a place as the mayor of your town, allowing you to customize the town way more than any other game in the series. This was my introduction to the series, and I remember spending so much time in this game, just walking around and taking in the atmosphere of the game. I'm a much bigger fan of more action-oriented games, but New Leaf does such a good job pacing you and giving you just enough to do to keep you in the game that it forced me to get invested in this tiny world and really get to know the residents of my town. It's the first game where I started to really care about more minor aspects of this world and really see NPCs as actual characters and not just a text box with flavor. One of the biggest standouts in New Leaf was the introduction of Isabelle, your secretary. While the series had Tom Nook being the closest thing to a mascot before, he wasn't everybody's cup of tea. Isabelle, on the other hand, was a breakout hit in this game, and it's not hard to see why. Her design is just adorable, and that carries over to her writing in game. It's no wonder why hormonal teenagers started slobbering over her. Not me though, I had Alfonso. Among all the 3DS games I owned, I spent most of my time here by far, and I wasn't the only one, with this game being the best selling in the series up to this point. This led to Nintendo branching out with the series, first with an application for the Wii U named the Animal Crossing Plaza. This was a hub similar to the Wii U's menu, but rather than being able to select your game, you were able to see people make Miiverse posts about the villagers in the game. It shut down a year later. What was the point of this? The real expansion of the brand started with an update to New Leaf entitled the Welcome Amiibo Update. This update added a secondary currency, a campsite, a bunch of new furniture, and achievements to the game. Most of these felt kind of stapled onto the side of the game and didn't really gel with the progression of it, but this wasn't the main focus of the update. As the name would suggest, this update added Amiibo functionality into the game. If you scanned one of the recently released Amiibo cards, you could invite the character to your town. They even added functionality outside of the Animal Crossing characters, allowing you to invite the Squid Sisters from Splatoon and several Zelda characters. Amiibo cards were such a good idea for this game and this game alone. Nintendo would have to be really ballsy to make a full figure of Jambette only for like 3 people to buy one, but making it a card series allowed them to make cards for nearly anyone and foster the same collectability that something like sports cards had. This even did well enough to inspire them to do a line of Mario Sports Mix Amiibo cards. Would you believe me if I said these didn't sell nearly as well? The Amiibo functionality was a fantastic addition, which meant that Nintendo had to ruin a good thing. Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. The answer to the question, what's the 4th horseman of the apocalypse? I just wrote bees. Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival was just an excuse to make Amiibo first, disappointing second, and a bad party game third. The gameplay is exceedingly boring, being a halfway point between Mario Party and a coma. The insanely forced gimmick of having to roll the dice with your Amiibo and high price point came together to make this a disappointing outing for the first Animal Crossing game in HD. Luckily, over on the 3DS, we got a slightly better spin-off, Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer. While Amiibo Festival was a bastardization of Animal Crossing's charm, Happy Home Designer aims to expand on the mechanics that the game hadn't gotten the chance to. Happy Home Designer had you doing exactly that, designing homes, happily. I'm fucking ecstatic! This game added a ton to the standard decoration mechanics of the previous game, being able to place items items with the touchscreen, move in between small gaps, and even decorate outside of the house. All new additions to the franchise. The only problem was that this game was for a console already on its way out and was overshadowed by people's hate for Amiibo Festival. Not a bad game, just released at a bad time. We got a reskin of Puzzle League and New Leaf, there was an Animal Crossing game mode in Nintendo Land, but most importantly, we got the mobile game Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. While I have zero experience with the game, it was clearly beloved, only being taken offline this year. It's clear that the people are finally starting to get hooked on Animal Crossing between this and New Leaf, and with the Nintendo Switch's release, fans of the series began to ask themselves when the next game in the series was going to be released. This led into E3 2018, where Nintendo had a fantastic showing, with them revealing a ton of games coming to Switch, like Hollow Knight, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Fortnite. There was a follow-up talk about the Pokemon Let's Go games, and in related news, they found a cure for narcolepsy. While these were all talked about, there was the first real look we got at Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with the Everybody Is Here trailer. Honestly, what an amazing unveiling of the game. The trailer starts with this little fake out. Look at any reaction to this trailer. They all react the same way. This leads directly into the real trailer, and what a treat. Revealing every character at the exact right moment to let you know that every character from Smash's past was being added to the game. That moment when it shows Snake is enough to get any Nintendo creep's pants wet. This reveal and the following 30 minutes delving into the game were a real treat. This set Nintendo into the full-on Smash Bros. Promotion cycle, and with every subsequent direct, they would announce a new character for the game, which brings us to the following direct on September 13th. Another pretty good direct showing off a ton of cool stuff, like the reveal of Luigi's Mansion 3 and Yoshi's Crafted World, talks about Super Mario Party, and showing that Undertale creator Toby Fox was composing for the RPG Little Town Hero, a game with a 64 on Metacritic. There were a lot of cool things talked about in this direct, with loads of games to anticipate and talk about. This was also the direct that introduced Nintendo Online, and we all know how that went. The direct ended with one final announcement, and what we saw was this. The instant this trailer started, everybody thought that New Leaf was getting a port to the Switch, and this trailer really hams it up, waiting until the last second to reveal, yup, she's a threat now. But I wasn't fooled by this. See, I have nothing going on in my life, and I'm a picky bitch. The lighting in this was just a little bit off. It didn't look bad or anything, it just had the same feeling as when you see a Splatoon model in Source Filmmaker. It may seem normal, but something's wrong. Get me away from that thing! This trailer not only revealed Isabelle in Smash, but also at the end teased that we were getting a new Animal Crossing game in 2019. Speculation was rampant until E3 2019 was on the horizon, with many credible sources saying that the new game was going to be showcased at the event, being titled Animal Crossing Back to Basics. While many were optimistic, these sources were also making insane claims like a Nintendo Land port, Tekken 7 coming to the Switch, and Super Mario Party receiving some new content long after the game had been released, which was just an insane claim, completely divorced from reality. We had to wait until 2021 for that. June 11th, 2019 arrived, and with it, we got Nintendo's 2019 E3 Nintendo Direct Showcase. This was not a bad showing from Nintendo in the slightest this year, showing off Luigi's Mansion 3, Banjo and Kazooie and the hero from Dragon Quest and Smash Bros. Ultimate, Astral Chain, Cadence of Hyrule. They even had that Netflix game based on Jim Henson's Dark Crystal, because you always need some funky shit. They showed off Mario and Sonic at the 2020 Olympic Games, the only Olympic Games that happened that year. But right before the presentation sizzle reel, there was this.
Your attention, please. The Nook Inc. Getaway Package charter flight will soon be arriving at the deserted island.
This was one of the best reveals from the Nintendo Switch era. Every Animal Crossing game was usually just perceived as an upgrade from the last one, in addition to an already established formula, but this trailer made the game look like a complete leap forward from the previous entries in the series. The graphics, the music, the ability to place objects outside, this was looking to be the best Animal Crossing game yet. While New Leaf definitely gave the series a slight bump in popularity, just by virtue of being on a console with a much larger user base made it seem like this was also going to be the biggest biggest Animal Crossing game yet. Though, as the release date of the game slowly drew near, rumors began to circulate of a delay, and sure enough, it was soon announced that the game would be delayed until March 20th, 2020. While game delays are usually met with an uproar and bomb threats, this was one of the few times I saw people be generally understanding of this. Fans will sink hundreds, if not thousands of hours into Animal Crossing games, and having to wait a little longer to get it just means that the game would be a hell of a lot better when people gave up their real lives for their virtual ones. In retrospect, this delay might have even been the best decision that Nintendo has ever made for a game, and they couldn't have ever known that at the time. In 2020, the entire world went into lockdown due to some killer bug or something. While scarabs roamed the street, everybody was urged to stay in time and do anything but let the insect into your home, and even by the first month of lockdown, people were already beginning to catch cabin fever. People were getting restless, and when people outside the gaming sphere heard that there was an experience that was almost like going outside, people began to froth at the mouth for this game. This led to one of my favorite images ever made.
Dearest Nintendo, we call upon you during these unprecedented times to show the best in humanity. It may seem trivial to release Animal Crossing New Horizons just a few days early, but by doing so you'll be providing a much-needed distraction to those self-isolating from the scary circumstances of the outside world. You'll be providing a much-needed distraction to those self-isolating from the scary circumstances of the outside world. Animal Crossing is a game well known for being meditative, relaxing, and joyous, therefore provoking much-needed feelings in the current climate. Copies of the game are already in the hands of critics, so it shouldn't be difficult to release this loving game digitally before its physical launch on Friday. It may seem small, but it will mean so much to many people around the world. Kind regards, your loyal and loving fans. Hashtag release Animal Crossing early.
I don't feel like this was made entirely in good faith. It was probably made by some child or man-child who was just excited for the game and wanted it a little early, but the fact it portrayed the release of the game like it would fix the entirety of people's mental health because it was kind of like going outside is just hilarious. It's funnier considering that the image talks about the game's digital release on Friday, showing that this was made the week of release. They couldn't wait 5 days for this game. The image quickly became infamous within the community, and years later it would even have an effect on the Animal Crossing series, with Nintendo accidentally releasing the offline version of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp a day early, finally completing the prophecy. Back in 2020, the launch date was quickly approaching and there was nothing to do but wait until March 20th, 2020. The game opens with child labor. I'm not complaining, I think more games should have it. In most Animal Crossing games, you open up on a train or taxi with the character Rover asking you a bunch of questions that would lead to how your character would look in-game. This was cute, but it did come with some drawbacks. It is somewhat charming not knowing what you're going to look like. After all, you don't go into the world knowing that. Don't I know it? However, these options were already limited and could make you look weird as hell. It led to a unique art style and quirkiness in the game, but most people don't like looking at a sentient wart while playing. And God forbid you're not a white guy, because apparently other races didn't exist before 2020. New Horizons has you choose your appearance from the start, which is a welcome addition. While I will miss the mystery that the other games had, the ability to customize from the start with more options than ever is a definite step forward for the series. As a non-binary person, it's definitely nice seeing them remove the male and female gender, instead replicating it with the male and female style. I would complain, but I've seen what androgyny in these games looks like. After forcing me to look like a lesbian lumberjack, I'm told to choose an island and am shipped away. Why is it showing me a trailer? I already bought the game. Animal Crossing New Horizons was the first Animal Crossing game in HD. Sure, we had the Plaza and Amiibo Festival, Animal Crossing New Horizons was the first Animal Crossing game in HD. The previous entries always felt very small and quaint, almost having the qualities of a diorama or dollhouse. They were very cozy experiences, focused on the small scale of everything. New Horizons doesn't exactly do away with that concept, but the entire art style has been updated to accommodate for readability and the jump to HD. While Amiibo Festival was in HD, it was a pretty direct translation of New Leaf's art style, without a lot of thought put into reinventing it. Not that it needed to, the game was just a simple spin-off, but it directly shows why and how New Horizons updated so much of the visuals. A lot of Amiibo Festival had a very cluttered designs that didn't look perfect when displayed on a massive TV, and the smaller, stubbier proportions of previous games' character designs looked a bit odd when not compressed down. New Horizons takes a lot of visual cues from previous games, but takes a minimalist approach to the UI and general texture design. Previous games would have a ton of texturing to make the menus feel like wood carvings or them just generally having a homemade feel to them, whereas New Horizons choose to make all the menus be presented with very flat pastel colored designs. It doesn't look bad by any means and is probably a lot more visually readable to a new player, but as a fan of the series I do feel like a bit of the charm was lost. The previous games felt very small and tangible in comparison to New Horizons. Every menu felt like something you could touch, something that feels like it's a part of the world, even when it's not. New Horizons menus are more visually readable, but they don't feel like a part of the world, instead feeling like what they are, menus. I also feel like the loss of small scale is somewhat felt in the character design. I feel like every Animal Crossing game would readjust the proportions of the characters to make them a bit closer to life, but this was the most obvious shift that we've ever seen. The characters had very chibi designs in the original, with the characters' heads being massive with tiny stubby little bodies, but in New Horizons the proportions have been made much less drastic. This is not an issue in the slightest, and I feel like if the games wanted these characters to feel alive, it was bound to happen eventually. It makes it so that the characters have much wider range of motion and you're able to read the characters' movements when at a distance from the screen. It has taken away a bit of the cuteness of Animal Crossing's characters, making them a bit more human-like, but it's not something that completely ruins the vibe of the series of the game. Something I feel did slightly change the vibe of the game was the introduction of the smartphone. Within the first hour of the game, Tom Nook gifts you a smartphone and $50,000 of debt. The Nook phone, as the game calls it, is a bit of a catch-all for the game, with most of the game's options and abilities being contextualized into smartphone apps. It's pretty standard stuff, a photo app, shopping app, map, and even an app to keep track of the game's new crafting system. I just feel as though the introduction of smartphones shows a bit of thematic shift within the series. All the previous games in the series have a very strong theme of community. The early games had you moving into a new town and becoming a member of this small-knit community, and you would be able to really get invested into the small town. New Leaf took this to its logical extreme by making you the mayor of the town, manning all the efforts to bring the community together and allowing you to make a much more tangible difference in the town, but it still made sure that you had to become a real member of it. The very concept of introducing smartphones takes away a bit of that escapism that previous games had, or at the very least changes the kind of escapism. While New Horizons doesn't have you doing TikToks or getting brain damage, it immediately connects you to a larger world. Now you don't have to go to your local store and talk to Timmy and Tommy, now you can just order it online. You no longer have to visit a photo booth to update your passport, you can just do it with your phone. You no longer have to visit a craftsman to get custom furniture, you can just follow an online tutorial. It does streamline a lot of the game's features and introduces a lot of mechanics that improve the game as a whole, but it also disconnects you from the community aspect of the game. And while the game does things like making sure that all the shops have different stock, it also leads to the suggestion that you aren't completely disconnected from the outside world. Not only that, but the fear that my landlord could call me at any point is not something I needed translated to my escapist fantasy. A much more minor complaint with the smartphone is that it does somewhat keep the game from being timeless. While we probably won't stop using smartphones anytime soon, in 50 years is this something we're gonna look back on as something that feels real? I know it's a strange thing to ask about a game where you move to an island of furries, build sentient snowmen, and can even meet ghosts, but when you go back to previous games, they do feel somewhat timeless. Sure, old games don't have the widescreen TV, and the catalog of furniture got updated with more and more items with each coming game, but there was never a moment where Isabelle tried to strap Google Glass onto your face. But New Horizons' heavy inclusion of the smartphone and analogs to real-world applications squarely dates it to the 20s. Maybe this isn't an actual issue. This is me complaining about what people will think in 50 years after all, but it is something I did think about on this playthrough. Despite all this complaining, I do feel like this game does initially do a very good job connecting you to your island. In the early game, New Horizons does still include this aspect, very clearly weaving it into the game's framing narrative. You, the Nooks, and 2 villagers you get at the beginning of the game all land on the abandoned island and are tasked with building it up. In the previous games, your town would start with 5 villagers, and while the smaller count in New Horizons may initially seem like a downgrade, it actually serves to make you more familiar with the villagers you start with. You're forced to talk to these very few characters, which in turn makes you more attached to them. I would even say that this goes as far as to connect you to Tom Nook and his kids more than any other game ever did. It turns a character that was previously considered nothing more than a debt collector into an overzealous entrepreneur and a kind father figure who supports his children. While these elements existed as far back as Wild World, New Horizons' framing and ability to hold itself back allows you to connect to the community more than ever before. While the framing does a wonderful job making you more invested in the characters on the island itself has the drawback of subtly shifting the aesthetic of the game. While it opens up the entire world for more customization and expansion of the gameplay, it does once again shift the type of game you're playing. This isn't a complaint, at least not entirely, but it will clearly have effects on the entire series going forward. Starting with the positives, this game does let you jump into the meat of gameplay a lot faster. In previous games, your progression was mostly limited to what the stores had in stock. If you needed an axe, it could take anywhere from the first day to weeks, whereas New Horizons allowed you to create what you need when you need, as long as you have the materials and have been given the crafting recipe. In fact, it allows the game to progress in a much more natural way than many other in the series, making the tools, progression, and story-based items rather than being left up to whatever the game feels like that morning. Progression and story are actually what I feel this game does better than any other game before it. A major complaint on launch was that this game starts you with the least amount of options than any game prior, but this is clearly to better support this game's structure. As stated, it familiarizes and connects you to your villagers, but on top of that, it connects you to your island more than previous games and actually gives you a proper tutorial to the game. Previous games in the series would pretty much throw you into the deep end with a couple of text boxes to point you in the right direction. I may have just been a stupid child, but it took me a ridiculous amount of time to establish anything about New Leaf without looking it up, and even afterwards, I never fully grasped it. New Horizons maintains the illusion of putting you in the deep end, but the deep end is a public pool rather than the North Pacific. It includes the actions of placing buildings, crafting tools, and interacting with the residents naturally into the story in a way that could feel invisible to a new player. While you're gathering materials during this introduction area, you can see the farther reaches of the island that you can't access, but are clearly a location you can go to later, and that serves as a secondary motivation aside from paying off your house. This is a tool that the developers use for the entire game, always making sure that there's more than one story objective to do at a time, but still making sure that they are related. The main motivator for me was unlocking the entirety of the island, but that is hidden behind other objectives, so it feels natural. As soon as the third day, Blathers makes his way onto your island and requests you to grab bugs and fish for him, and on the same day you receive the vaulting pole, in addition to finding a spot for Timmy and Tommy's shop. These all come together in a love triangle of game design. Building the shop, allowing you to explore the island, exploring the island, allowing you to catch more creatures, catching more creatures, allowing Blathers to build the museum, and building the museum serving to build your town up for the main quest. See? A love triangle! What can I say? I have shape blindness. Every single one of these also springs off into their own additional quests, like Nook's Cranny opening leading to the Mabel sisters to build their shop, the island exploration leading into new villagers getting houses, and the museum leading into the collection of dust. No single thing exists in its own bubble, and for those early hours, the world really feels alive and these characters do really feel real. It also forces you to acquaint yourself with every mechanic in the game. Even if you don't care about the character customization, you probably care about building up the island's status. Even if you don't care about planting different fruits on your island, if you're off finding new villagers, you might as well. Even if you don't care about the collections in the museum, you're probably already decorating the island and those blemishes on the ground get in the way of that. It creates a game loop that has every single part of it matter in a way that feels natural and real that the series never even got close to in previous entries. Sure, you had daily quests from your villagers, the Golden Tool quest, and even building up the downtown area, New Leaf and City Folk, but all of these were separate from each other for the most part, whereas New Horizons makes sure that everything is interconnected. A small complaint I saw from most people is the game's soundtrack, or rather the lack of one in the early game. For the first week or so until you build the town hall, you're only going to be hearing the same 2-minute loop over and over and over again. In the game's defense, you probably won't be playing more than an hour or so this early on, but to counteract that, try listening to this on loop for 10 minutes and you'll start seeing red too. Though I am colorblind. That being said, I can't find myself hating this decision, because once the town hall is built and you load into the game for the first time, Using music as a signifier of your progression in the game was a fantastic choice. It really conveys that feeling that once you build the town hall, the city comes to life, and they even use this trick again later with the upgrade to Nook's Cranny. One thing I find interesting is the direction of the soundtrack in this game. Previous games' soundtracks heavily used ukuleles and steel drums, giving the soundtrack a very tropical feel. New Horizons instead opts for more acoustic guitar, bongos, and trumpets for its soundtrack, which I find interesting. This is most likely due to longtime Nintendo composer Kazumi Totaka taking more of a supervisor role on this project, with Atsuaki Iwata taking the role as composer on this game, among a few others. The soundtrack doesn't hit the same beats as previous games, but it's not trying to. I find many of the songs to fit the setting just fine. I just think it's interesting that the most tropical game yet has the least tropical soundtrack in the series. Even those who aren't the biggest fan of the new soundtrack's direction can at least agree on one thing. The main theme of the game is probably the best song the series has ever seen. Hold on, I'm getting an update. It appears I'm actually just delusional. Another addition I enjoy is the addition of the Nook Miles system, but it does come with a few drawbacks. This secondary currency is locked to the game's achievement system, and this works so well for the game. It helps give a reason to do the actions that you might not do or reward you for keeping with the game for a long time. This is great! It made me do things like buy clothes and fill the museum when I would ignore stuff like that in previous games. The reason I mix is because I feel like there's almost too many of them. Not the fact that there's so many it takes a year to complete, but the fact that a lot of the smaller character-driven moments usually have a Nook Miles reward attached to them. While it is nice to get the miles, it does take a bit of the immersion out of the world. When helping your community is met with a notification from an omnipotent cell phone, it makes these interactions feel less like talking to a person and more like talking to a computer. Man, I'm so sorry to hear about your divorce. Just know if you need anything, I'm here to talk about it. It turns these characters into moving set pieces rather than them being your neighbors. Even if I wasn't the biggest fan of how they handled these interactions, I still do really like a lot of the new touches added to the characters in this game. I love the way you can find them doing little activities in the overworld. It really does make them feel a bit more alive. I also just love a lot of the new characters' looks. They're all really cute. Cute enough to be involved in human trafficking. That is clearly a cat. Between unofficial Animal Crossing discords and the fan item trading website Nookazon, there was a whole web ring surrounding the movement of these fictional animal people around. New Horizons had people salivating to get fan favorite characters to stand around on their island. I saw people drop over $1,000 on Rayman. I bought both Mario Maker 2 and Celeste with the money I got from giving someone Anka. The online aspects of the game are definitely a huge part of the game. Previous games in the series had issues such as the original only letting one person in the town at a time, or city folk with the We Speak, the worst implementation of voice chat in a game ever. Both New Leaf and New Horizons allow you to just visit your friend's town when they're online and just run around and have fun. New Leaf had a few mini games you could even play, whereas New Horizons doesn't. I personally never really liked the mini games in New Leaf, but they could have still included something to do that wasn't just walking around and talking. They could have included the mini games from Amiibo Festival or New Leaf, or even, God forbid, add something new. Some may argue that the lack of mini games was good because it led to people making their own fun, but to that I say, what would you rather have? A fully fledged board game that could be played over and over and over, or this stick I just licked? A major criticism I saw around the game's release is that you start with less than any other Animal Crossing game, but I beg to differ. While you may start out with a smaller section of your own town with fewer NPCs, the game has more to do in a single day than I feel like any of the other games before it. Day 3 of New Leaf, you can talk to your villagers, get some fruit, and that's about it. Meanwhile, in New Horizons, you can go out, sell your fruit, work on decorating your island, talk to your villagers, complete your daily Nook Miles goals, gather crafting materials, fly to another island, and complete whatever task Tom Nook has for you. You may not have as many shops as you may have had in previous Animal Crossing games, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is more engaging. I think that many fans are used to their progress and options being represented by the buildings in town, rather than by the options actually presented. The game gives you more options than ever, however, I do still think that this was an issue. There was definitely an emphasis on gameplay with New Horizons. While this may sound goofy, like no duh, it's a video game, previous Animal Crossing games put a lot more focus on the smaller moments in the game. They weren't focused on what you were doing, rather what you were experiencing. There were dozens of buildings that didn't serve any real purpose aside from giving you a cute little event. There's not a lot of that in New Horizons. Almost everything has a reason to be there, usually to give you themed items or serve into the main plot line. While this leads to more engaging gameplay, it also leads to less atmospheric moments and less overall overall personality. There also seems to be a lack of series staples that are sorely missed. Both City Folk and New Leaf featured a downtown area that had a ton of shops that would be filled in over time, each of which having a specific niche and shop owner with a unique personality. While some of these were more useful than others, they all had their spot and made the world feel more real. After all, it's not like you go into every building in your city every day. New Horizons does away with most of these, but that makes sense for the game they were going for. Most of the other games tuck these buildings away in their own locations, but New Horizons really couldn't do that while maintaining the deserted island plot they had decided on. They had to sift out the non-essential shops and make them fit on the island. Even when they added the Roost in a post-launch update, they had to cram it inside of the museum. Luckily, they didn't completely axe everyone. A lot of the shop owners do make occasional pilgrimages to your island, and it is appreciated, but with them being changed from a constant to a random chance, it definitely led to me interfacing with these aspects less. At the very least, they did attempt to include new characters with CJ and Flick. I actually love these characters. Not only do they give me a reason to catch fish and bugs, but they're also just really cute characters, and I hope they stay as mainstays to the series. It does creep into the territory of dating the game with one of them being a streamer, but the concept of an omega popular live streamer who focuses exclusively on fishing is a concept that's divorced enough from reality I can forgive it. It doesn't flash a VTuber in your face the way that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet does, and instead uses the influencer character as an excuse for you to catch fish. Eventually they would add more series mainstays later, but that leads to another issue. The post-launch updates. Nintendo had experimented with free post-launch updates earlier in the Switch's life with games like Mario Tennis Aces and Kirby Star Allies, but these were mostly seen as positives, increasing the amount of content in Mario Tennis and making Kirby Star Allies worth a damn. Half a damn. When it was revealed that Animal Crossing would receive post-launch content, most people saw the potential in it. After all, Animal Crossing is a game that progresses with time, and they had already done this with their previous game. All the developers had to do was have everything from the first couple of months ready, and they could complete things like seasonal events as time went on and add additional content as time went on as well. Oh boy, I hope they spit on this after I buy it. In reality, this is less of a welcome amiibo, more of a scam. Put it plainly, the game shipped incomplete. The additions were minimal, and while they may have gotten eyes back on the game for a short time, they ended up just showing how much content really was missing at launch. The game was being worked on at the beginning of COVID, and they had to completely reinvent the series. It was by no means a simple game to develop. The problem is that when you only focus on the main gameplay and take away elements that fleshed out the world, it just invites fans to feel empty. Sure, a newcomer to the series may not notice what's missing, but to anyone who's played the games before, it makes the game feel more empty than entries that came out over 15 years ago. Amiibo's back, just like leprosy. I'm not a huge fan of it in this game, sadly. Like leprosy. I don't like that you have to still bargain with the villagers just to get them to stay on your island. Yeah. I don't know, I already spent money on the cards. I feel like after paying specifically to get the character, I shouldn't have to haggle them onto my island. I honestly feel like there was better implementation of the amiibo cards in Taiko no Tatsujin Atsumete Tomodachi Daisuken. Why is that? I like drumming. If anything, this did give them an excuse to do a 5th wave of Animal Crossing amiibo cards 5 years after the line was rightfully presumed dead. The most major addition was the Happy Home Paradise DLC, essentially a sequel to Happy Home Designer back on the 3DS. And soon after, we got an upgrade to Harv's Island. While initially just a spot to do in-game photo shoots, the island addressed one of the main complaints by adding the open market. These updates added a lot, and if you're picking up the game now, it's nice to have, but at the same time, the game wasn't developed with this area in mind, and it does really feel stapled onto the side of the game in the same way that Welcome Amiibo content did in New Leaf. It also came so late into the game's life that a massive amount of the game's player base never even saw this area. The player base had significantly dropped by this point, and even with the addition, it almost exclusively included characters already present in the game from the start. The first portion of the game is paced extremely well, but as the game goes on and you gain more and more power over the island, the objective of the game shifts. It slowly drifts away from being about the characters on your island and rather just becomes about the island itself. You gain the ability to place fences, move houses, pave roads, and even terraform the land, allowing you to customize your island to your heart and wallet's content. New Leaf gave you the ability to add very small additions to your town like new bridges and small outdoor areas, but New Horizons lets you go hog wild on your island, and I am so divided on this. I was never a fan of city builders or anything like them. The most enjoyment I get out of The Sims are the song covers. What made Animal Crossing special to me is the fact that you're on equal footing as all the other characters in the game. Sure, you might have some more abilities as a real human player, but it wasn't like you were any more special than your neighbor down the road. You may be the main character in your own story, but all the other characters had their own lives independent of what you were doing. New Leaf might have given you a bit more footing, but aside from making you a part of the patriarchy, everything you did was in service of not just yourself, but also your citizens. New Horizons arbitrarily puts the very special boy pin on you and lets you do whatever the hell you want. I keep saying it, this really is not a bad thing. Rather, it removes a lot of what I personally loved about this series and replaces it with one of the most satisfying town builders I've ever played. The jump to HD was perfect for this game, allowing it to display so much more detail than before, and with the massive catalog of furniture and decoration, you really can make whatever you want with this game. The ability to move the buildings wherever you want and place any item you want outside makes it so that you can make some of the coziest locations in any video game I've ever seen. After filling out your island with villagers and decorating the hell out of it, you get KK Slider to perform on your island, and this is where the game's story ends. From this point forward, you're left to do whatever you feel with your island, and while there's still plenty of decorating you could do and they're still filling the museum, this is where the game rolls credits. I like Animal Crossing New Horizons. While it's not what I go to an Animal Crossing game for, it's still one of the most cozy and fun experiences you can have with a video game. And hey, with the grace of time and with the ability to go outside, the game is able to be experienced in a much more intended state. Now, does that mean I'm actually gonna go outside? The shift in the game's focus wasn't an accident. In an interview with series producer Hisashi Nagomi and director Aya Kiyogoku, they stated that they needed to change the elements making up this game, otherwise there really wouldn't be a point in making a new game. They decided to put emphasis on the island rather than the characters on it because previous games had already explored the character interaction portion of the games extensively. This decision is not an issue, rather it just marks a shift in the series going forward. It's not like the developers hold a disdain for previous games in the series, but this game was both the biggest shift in the series and the best selling in the series. Even if I liked this game, I still prefer the much more NPC focused games that came before it, but with the outstandingly positive reception of New Horizons, I doubt we'll be seeing this gameplay style for a good while. But is that really a bad thing? New Horizons breathes so much life into the series, and now that they've made this foundation, they can definitely implement older aspects of the other games into future titles, and even if they don't, I still have the Animal Crossing Plaza to go back to. I found myself really enjoying this game and a lot of its aspects, and I really hope a lot of them make their way into the next title. And hey, with the Switch 2 just being announced, it's only a matter of time before we get news on it. I'm so excited to see how they iterate on this future gameplay style, and actually they didn't let me invite Alfonso to my island.
Nintendo, hear our plea. Release the Animal Crossing New Horizons game 3 days early. Please.